In.
I think now. Okay, here we are.
Hello, Internet.
Hi, everyone.
Is this thing on? Okay.
It's okay. I'm like, hey, everyone. So I am Carmen, the digital editor at Ms., and I am here with Sally Kohn, commentator and the author of the new book, The Opposite of Hate. Oh my God, it's very bright.
It's very bright.
Like
we're here in Los Angeles, so they have this thing here called the sun. I haven't seen it in a while. It's lovely and rejuvenating, and is giving me vitamin D. Very happy.
Yeah, it's a good sunny day today. But yeah, The Opposite of Hate: A Field Guide to Repairing Our Humanity. Thank you for being here.
Oh, Carmen, thanks for having me. I'm very excited for our conversation.
Yeah, and so I'm gonna start with the thorny stuff, if that's okay.
The whole book technically is about thorny stuff, so it's fine. But you go thorniest or how? Listen, yes.
Yeah.
Important conversations, let's have them.
Yeah, and so I reviewed the book, and I mean, full disclosure, I loved the book, and I reviewed the book, and we had set up this interview.
Make that full disclosure as often as you can. Just for the sake of, your integrity and owning your own, I'd like you to just make that disclosure, like maybe every, minute or so, you should say that you enjoyed the book.
I did. I enjoyed the book, and we set up this interview, and in the weeks sort of since the book's actual release, because obviously this was all set up in advance of the book, you have faced some criticism, namely from Black feminists, around some of the dynamics in one of the very early, I think it's the first chapter of the book.
Yes, I guess there's an introduction in the first chapter. Yes, that's correct.
And so I sort of wanted to talk to you about how we can figure out what that unfolding conversation means moving forward for the movement, for the methodology you lay out in the book. And so just as a quick summary, Amina So, one of the powerhouses behind the Call Your Girlfriend podcast, is quoted in this version of the book that I'm holding in my hands. I believe she's no longer quoted in the future editions.
Well, if we make it to her. We heard concern the minute I found out we could do that. I didn't know we could do that, but the minute we found out we do, we removed her name from the digital editions and from
any
future print editions.
Yes, and so she and Ijeoma Oluo, you had sort of condensed and quoted a Twitter exchange she had with a racist troll back in 2015. Always a good time. And also a quick note that Ijeoma is the author of So You Want to Talk About Race, another book that I would urge everyone watching to immediately go out, buy, and read.
As, by the way, would I?
Yes. And so Amina and Ijeoma both took issue sort of with the way they were presented. So claims the quote attributed to her wasn't said, and Ijeoma has said that she thinks that the framing of that section reinforces an idea in her book that is the Martin-Malcolm dichotomy, so that there are, good and bad kinds of activists, and that if you are the bad kind of activist, your activism and your emotions are invalid. And sort of your activism is devalued, and in some ways, inequality becomes this is your problem because you're not responding correctly. And so I know you've taken some steps towards accountability here. This has been sort of ongoing, but I just wanted to go a little deeper. Your book is about the ways in which our lives are shaped by hate and a spectrum of hate, and obviously our personal interactions can sort of amplify these hateful social dynamics that we see, and as activists that we're super sensitive to. And I think, that a sticking point here is whether or not this situation illustrates, a sense of that your own actions maybe didn't correspond with the text. And so I know you've been reckoning with that, and quite publicly over the last few weeks. And I'm just wondering, how do you feel you could have done better to begin with, and what will you be doing differently moving forward from this as a way of sort of responding to all of that?
First of all,
sorry, was that a lot?
I feel like that. No.
It's a long question.
It's okay. Listen, it's okay. First of all, because these are important conversations to have. And look, while I think obviously learning lessons is always hard. Learning lessons in public is always hard.
Yes.
That is also the only way you learn, right? So look, both privately with Amina for some time, and publicly, I've tried to apologize for my mistakes, which include not reconfirming that she was okay with me using her quote, let alone also for not seeing as a white woman how that the quote, the words I use, the words, that are in, it's very hard because part of what, look, can I just go back a second and say, I have no, interest in relitigating this over and over again, but in terms of how we got to where we got to, and whatever. And I also don't like being in a position where, to defend my truth, I have to call someone else's truth into question, right? So, what we end up, what is undoubtedly clear is that I wrote something that hurt two people. And I could talk forever about my intent and that I didn't mean to and that I didn't see how it would, and it did. And intent isn't the same as impact, and I have to wrestle with, reckon with the impact and apologize, which I have tried to do as earnestly and thoroughly and honestly as I can, and try to make amends, which I try to do, including by removing Amina's name from the book, and also not making this, not drawing more attention to the quote that is obviously so hurtful to her. So apologizing, doing what I can to fix it, and try to learn and do better going forward. Now, as I well know, it is, apologies don't necessarily beget or are not necessarily entitled to forgiveness. So that's the journey of others. Again, I think one of my hopes for myself in the world is that in our society, in our country, we tend to not want to learn these lessons, not, to push them away, to push away the discomfort and the growth and being challenged and right. And because it is uncomfortable, and it is through discomfort that growth and change happens in people and in a society. And so, that's like, honestly, that is where I'm at, and I will continue to be sorry, and also know that being sorry isn't enough, that it's also a matter of doing better going forward, right? The proof is in my actions going forward, and hopefully being better going forward.
Yeah. Well, and I think, too, for anyone who isn't familiar with the book or hasn't read it yet, I do think maybe we pause here for a mini briefing on the 4 solutions that you put forward to hate in the book. So connection speech, connection spaces, connection thinking, and connection systems. There's a lot of connection in the book. Can you sort of summarize them real quick and just explain how they're meant to work individually and together to sort of shift culture? Because that's sort of the aspect of the book that struck me most, that I was most interested in, was this idea of connection as, an antidote.
Well, can I before we do, I don't want to lose an important piece of something else you said, which is that and I imagine this is self-evident, but maybe it's not. But this book is my journey. It's my quest, and it is not a prescription. It is not you do this or else you're wrong. In fact, it is my part of the quest is in fact to stop judging and condemning and having a notion that this choice is right and that choice is wrong and these people are right and that choice is wrong, and which is why I wanted to, again, however poorly, insensitively, offensively I did so, which is why I wanted to have my own privilege checked in the book. And I actually, look, I think, as a movement scholar, as a movement practitioner, we need a spectrum of strategies. Mm-hmm. We need a spectrum of approaches. Now, I'm making a case for one approach which I think we are not using enough, which is that before we even get to the sort of solution piece, in the face of hate, right, whether it's in person or online, there are generally speaking 3 options. One is to do nothing, right? And that is for your own safety and sanity to say, I'm not engaging, whether it's I'm not responding to that troll or I'm not going to talk to you about this Uncle Louie. We're just, right? And that is okay, right? Or to say, hey, that's not my work to do. That's your job as an ally. Please do that work, right? Yeah. So not engaging, that's okay. The other approach is to fight hate with hate. Now, I want to be really clear that this to me is not saying, let go of your deeply held beliefs. Let go of your disagreements and your differences. I happen to believe our differences and our disagreements are what make us great as a species and what make us great as a country. I want us to lean into them. I want us to be able to talk about, express, even celebrate our differences and our disagreements in ways that don't demean and dehumanize others and feed the dynamic of hate. I do not think, right? And we've all done it. Oh, yeah. In our minds, with our fingers, whatever. When we see hate, we respond with more hate.
Yeah, I'm like, I felt called out when I was reading the book. I was like, oh, yep. And I have angry and hateful reactions to people I disagree with.
And I will tell you, this is an opinion, I do not believe hate is the answer to hate. I do not believe cruelty is the answer to cruelty. I do not believe injustice is the answer to injustice. So then, there's a third option. Again, I think in the sort of muscles of our social and democratic discourse, this is a muscle that has atrophied, which is that we respond with engagement, with kindness, with compassion, in a constructive, not destructive way with each other. Again, not capitulating, right? I did a book event a few days ago with Maya Wiley, brilliant thinker and activist and leader on issues of race and justice, and she made the point that compassion is not agreement. I can disagree with you.
Yeah.
I can disagree with you vociferously, passionately, obstreperously. You could think of lots of other synonyms.
We are
without attacking you and destroying you as a person, without suggesting that for me to be right, you have to be wrong. For me to be good, you have to be bad. For me to be, for me to win, you have to lose. You don't have to do that. And to be able to invite people into change and give people the chance to change. And to believe, as Brian Stevenson, who obviously wrote the book Just Mercy, founder of the Equal Justice Initiative, important racial justice activist, just opened the Lynching Memorial Museum, has said, none of us are the worst thing we've ever done in life. If you believe that, if you believe that none of us are the worst thing, none of us are the worst thing we've done or said or even thought, then the question is, can we engage in ways that respect our mutual humanity, see the potential good in others, and create opportunities for people to be better, as opposed to pushing away, attacking, and responding to hate.
Yeah. And I do, that was also definitely something that throughout the book was very interesting to me too, was this idea that you could be imprisoned in Israel and come out of that experience saying, I still have these political beliefs about the Israel-Palestine situation, but I also can now see that we are all people and have compassion for everyone who's involved. This sort of notion that trying to connect with people doesn't mean you're saying, I've changed my mind, or
I lay down to you, or we're meeting in the middle, or we're holding hands, or we're singing Kumbaya.
What you think is okay or how you behave is okay. It mostly just is like a search for more understanding.
And for instance, for me, this is deeply informed by the history of non-violent protest movements, which scholar Erica Chenoweth has shown over 2 centuries are more effective in winning change than violent social movements. And at the same time, they're not mutually exclusive. So, for instance, you can have a leader like Nelson Mandela, who, famously engaged with and befriended his jailers, and who, when after he was elected president, one of the first things he did was went and had tea with the widow of the architect of apartheid, and also embraced a very aggressive strategy of armed conflict. Again, going back to, Palestine, Israel, you can talk to 2 people who will say, I believe in equal humanity and equal dignity, and I also believe that aren't right. So it's not that these things aren't, and part of the challenge is we lose the nuance. But again, I have a preference, I have a bias, I have a vision, I have a hope, especially as a progressive, especially as someone who says rhetorically that I believe in the equal dignity and humanity of others. I believe in the equal dignity and humanity of others. The question then is, and I say that, we need to believe in the equal dignity and humanity of queer folks and Muslims and immigrants. And the question is, do I also believe in the equal dignity and humanity of people who disagree with me, even those who deny my humanity and dignity?
Mm-hmm.
I recognize that for some feels like a bridge too far. Those are the conversations I hope we have. Again, in constructive, not destructive ways, because these are the questions that help us figure out how we move forward as a society.
Yeah. Well, and I was moved by a lot of the examples in the book. And I mean, they're from all over the globe. These are stories that deal with everything from genocide and violent extremism to Twitter trolls and dinner table conversations. And I was really struck by there was a lot of evidence in there to suggest that there's a very jarring and disarming power to, I almost feel like, people who, there is an inherent, and you say this in the book, an inherent indignity in asking marginalized people to be the ones who take this huge step of saying, like, I am, and you're not even requesting that we love our enemies. It's not that we have to forgive them or say, like, what you do is fine, what you believe is fine. Just this idea that there's something disarming about almost just like not entertaining the conflict with them, of saying, you have this belief, I have this belief, we don't have to, the beliefs conflict, but you know what I mean? Like there is sort of a power there to disarm someone. Like I felt like there were a lot of examples of you engaging with your Twitter trolls and of, just sort of people who were engaged in very extreme behaviors, expecting to have that sort of hate reflected back at them, and then when it's not, there's a disarming humanity there. And I have experienced that. I was sort of thinking about my experiences with my myriad experiences with trolls when I was preparing for this interview, and because I face a lot of online harassment, obviously, as someone who works on the internet, and there have been a lot of moments of sort of acknowledging each other's humanity in passing, and sometimes in ways that are very surprising. Or I'll recognize, some troll that I'm familiar with will intervene on my behalf when some other troll goes too far.
And blow your mind.
And it does. It blows my mind. To see two people agree that like women shouldn't have the right to vote, but then disagree on whose language was the most offensive in their respective tweets is interesting. Like, is a death threat a step too far? Or yeah. Right? And so, you know, there's almost that, and you touch on this too in the book, this idea that a lot of models for activism are credited to and have been shaped by male thinkers, obviously. I mean, we live in our world. So you reference Rules for Radicals by Saul Alinsky, which is a book I have in my bookshelf too. You know, it's an important text. And it's interesting to me too, this idea of compassion and nonviolence and sort of learning to walk this different kind of walk and seeing how that might change our movement. That seems very distinctly, you know, like feminine, feminist, tapping into sort of something that isn't about masculine power. That's not about who has the most brute force in this situation, who can hurt someone the most or say the meanest thing, or, you know, however we feel ourselves coming up against hateful behavior.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
And how much of our politics and political strategy is shaped by that.
Yes, I mean, and we see, you know, attack ads even are an extension of this idea that you win by not just by holding yourself in the highest esteem in the race, but by actively destroying your opponent, or, you know. So, you know, this is such a good conversation. There's so many things.
You know, I want to be clear, because it appears that often I'm not, or, you know, right, that I do not think the answer to hate is to just be nice to people who hate. I don't.
Yeah.
First of all, as I try to point out every chance I get, hate is baked into, is in fact the founding ideology, the infrastructure of our nation. A country that was created by wiping out native populations, literally and figuratively built on slavery and slaves, and has at every single point since every chance fought tooth and nail to deny basic rights and equality to group after group after group. Hate is endemic to the United States and to the American experience. And part of what I hope we can do, part of what I want to contribute to is, and you said this, and you're right, listen, we all can operate and move in different spaces. And I do think that's where allyship matters. That's why, for instance, as a Jewish woman, people say, why don't you talk about, you know, oh, by the way, I'm also gay, right? So, I'm sorry, internet, if that freaked you out. So people will, you know, well, why don't you speak out more on queer stuff? I try to speak out on queer stuff, but, you know, it's more powerful for others who are not queer to speak out on queer stuff. And it is very powerful for me as a Jewish woman to speak out against Islamophobia. And so that is the work that we can often do for others if we are willing to. And part of what I hope to do is to, look, at the very least, I would love it if we as a society, as a country, all of us on the left and the right, would stop arguing about whether hate and injustice and inequity is a reality in our policies and institutions and systems and culture and media and relationships, and stop arguing about whether unconscious bias, implicit bias, whether it's implicit racial bias, misogyny, I would like us to get to the point where we stop arguing about whether that is real. We have literally centuries of evidence, mounds of lived experience, volumes of research. It should not be debatable. What we should be arguing about, what we should be debating, is what we do about it. Yeah. And so it is not that simple, right? We have to root out in every facet of every dimension of our policies and public life hate in its many forms. and also, I think, address it in the way we talk with each other. And I will say very clearly, to me, there's a moral dimension to this and a spiritual dimension. I'm sorry, there's a moral, spiritual dimension, and there's a practical dimension. And by the way, again, not a prescription. You choose your own adventure. You do you. This is
Yeah.
right. So morally, it's, look, if I believe these values, if I believe that no person is the worst thing they've ever done, if I believe that people are redeemable, then what does that mean in how I treat everyone? There's a practical piece to this too, which is if I recognize that to address hate in its fundamental ways and injustice and inequity in fundamental forms, that it's going to take not only actually working through those and changing policies and votes and right, but people have to change that. Like usually that's in the history. I'm a social movement person, so in the history it's masses of people seeing the demand, and the more people you get, that right. And so, I mean, I'm oversimplifying social movement theory, but the point is, for society to change, people need to change.
Mm-hmm.
And the pragmatic piece here is that I have yet to experience a time in my history as an organizer or my history on this earth where attacking, demeaning, belittling, dehumanizing someone else makes them want to open up to your perspective and your ideas. It does not. It, in fact, we know from neuroscience, makes them dig in.
Mm-hmm.
So at a pragmatic level, we have to give people the opportunity to be their best selves, to change, to grow, to learn, to transform, inviting people into change rather than attacking them. Yeah, pragmatically. So that we can then bring more people along to the much harder work that we have to do as a society, where we get to talking about how we do that rather than just debating whether we have a problem. We've got a problem. Stop debating it.
Yeah, and I was like many moons ago, I was on a panel with the brilliant Cecily from Feministing, and she talked a lot about this idea of, we were talking about rape culture, and that obviously, and we see this, and it's totally justified too with the Me Too movement, like, boy, bye, like, you have been accused of being a serial sexual harasser, I'm over it, goodbye, like, it is completely okay to be like, there is no redemption story here, like, I just don't want to engage. But then there's this aspect of that she sort of challenged us, I just remember coming away from the experience thinking that it was powerful, because it sort of, she raised this question of, if we believe that we can change hearts and minds, we have to give people this opportunity to be changed. And I mean, I also would say too, to add to that, like, that obviously just being nice to people is not a solution to white supremacy or neo-Nazism or sexism or any of these things. But
Literally no.
That a lot of the people in the book sort of are doing what you're talking about, which is practicing this moral dimension of, in my everyday life, I want to try to be more compassionate. But then they're also, they're freedom fighters. They're also people who are in the trenches still fighting for the things they believe in that other people disagree with. And, it's not like their activism is that they're nice neighbors. Their activism is that they are activists and they are acting and doing things. And you also, in the book, you sort of, that reverberating impact of these different levels of connection. So you're connecting with people, you're building spaces where you can connect with people, and then that creates this ability for people to be in that space and connect over a solution and create a solution that people actually all in the room understand, because we've sort of destroyed the barrier of, well, I don't believe sexism is real and I do, so we're never going to agree on a solution to sexism because we can't talk to each other. So yeah, I definitely,
Right.
Yes. So
and if I can say, right, this is because, again, in my experience, the way we have these conversations tends to be, well, let me tell you how you're X, Y, or Z, how you're this-ist or that-ophobic or this, or right. And for me, I don't know, maybe it's because I'm Jewish and I'm just very comfortable with guilt. But I find it useful to say, let me start by talking about my blind spots, my biases. Right? So I, as a woman, I know internet. You've heard on half the internet that I'm not a woman. but I am.
Oh my God.
Anyway, that as a woman, I am sexist. And there's a moment in the book where I say this to someone on the right, and it's just like totally flabbergasted. It's like, dude, like that's how it works. Like, especially at the level of unconscious bias. Unconscious bias, unconscious sexism, unconscious misogyny affects men and women. And like it's not, and let's go through some examples and let's play that out. And like, it doesn't make me a bad person. It makes me a normal person, because it's like if you grow up breathing this air of this toxic stew of hate, of history and habits of hate that we have in the United States, and you are going to exhale misogyny, whether you mean it or not. And again, listen, this maybe goes back to the spiritual piece too, but it's a practice, not always cheap, right? But to believe that people can change, to believe that people can be more than the worst thing that they've ever done. To believe is one of the things I learned, that most people do not intend to be hateful. Most people do not intend to be hateful. Most people don't wake up in the morning thinking they're hateful. By the way, there's research that, and this bears out in some of the anecdotes as well of the ex-terrorists and ex-neo-Nazis and people I talked to in the book, but there's even research that most people, even in overt extremist hate organizations that we would just point to and be like, well, they must at least think they're hateful. They do not see themselves as hateful. I talked to a woman who was a terrorist interrogator for the army in Afghanistan, and she said something to the effect of, most people believe their intentions to be good. So that doesn't mean, we talked earlier about intention versus impact, it doesn't mean they do good things. Doesn't mean, but I will tell you, no one likes being told they are bad. No one likes being told, because of something hurtful or hateful or mean or bad that they did, that means they are a totally, completely, irredeemably bad person. Yeah.
Well, and also I feel like something that connects the two pieces too, of the sort of these two dimensions of the book, is the
I'm like having my Marco Rubio moment.
I know,
right.
Reaching over for mine, very professional setup on this table. The ABC, which it was very early on in the book, but I literally found myself like repeating it to myself, the ABC pattern of affirm, bridge, convince. And you used it as an example of how to talk to your Uncle Ned about, gay people or racism or immigration at the dinner table. And instead of saying, and I mean, Lord knows, I have not really done a good job at even trying to figure out ABC in my interactions with some of my relatives, and I can admit that at the dinner table. But this idea of saying, I hear you, and in some ways, there's always that central root, and I can't remember the specific example you used, but saying like, oh, okay, oh yes, I do. You were talking about immigration, you used as in hypothetical.
Yeah.
Someone saying, they're taking our jobs. And you saying, I'm also concerned about the economy, affirm.
Which is true. Which is true. I'm not affirming, right? And affirm isn't the same as agree. And you're not affirming,
yes, that's
affirm
right.
Isn't the same as agree. It also isn't argue, which is you're wrong. And let me tell you why you're wrong. Because what happens when you argue with people is the persuasion, reasoning, rationing parts of the brain shut down, and the little lizard brain turns on, and people pick a side, and guess what? They're not picking your side. That's why it's called an argument. So you want to keep it conversational. You want to keep, again, if you want to engage, you can also say, Uncle Ned, man, no, we're not going there. I'm sorry. I love you.
Yeah, this
Let's
is ignorant. Let's
talk
not
about
do this.
movies. Or you don't even ignorant, because that's going to, right? Like, but just like, right? Because let me tell you, again.
This is why I have failed
again,
at the ABC.
Well, again, no one is just who they voted for in 2016, just like no one is just who they voted for in 2008. And I hope we are all more than just our political views. And we have to recognize, let me just say this, we have to recognize that we happen to have a political culture, a media culture, and a culture in general right now that emphasizes the extremities of our disagreements and divisions in ways that are unhealthy and in ways that are deliberately divisive. So, for instance, when we look at what Russia did online to manipulate the 2016 election, it's because those divisions were there, and they can say, look at how divided those people are on this issue, that issue, that issue. We're just going to push those buttons and right. And so by the same token,
that's an ages-old manipulative practice.
Totally. Yeah. By the same token, right? Like I talked about this in the book, but for a long time, I and others have been pointing out that in modern politics, political leaders and parties have engaged in a deliberate practice of racial fear-mongering and racial resentment. Now, both parties have done it. Bill Clinton really did it. Obviously, Hillary Clinton did too. Talked about super predators. That was mobilizing racial resentment or using dog whistle politics. But it is, by and large, an invention and sort of amplification of the modern Republican Party for the last 60 or so years. And this, by the way, is a conspiracy theory. Like, they said they did it. Like, Nixon admitted it, and Reagan, like, they knew what they were doing, and Donald Trump took a dog whistle and turned it into a blowhorn, and we can say, hey, they're doing this, and look at the impact that's going to have, and that is going to lead to racial hatred and resentment and division and fear, and guess what? It did. It did. And we can talk about the way our media is feeding people fights instead of facts, right? And say, look at the consequences it's going to have. And guess what? It has that consequence. So when it has that consequence, we can't then also say it is disingenuous, it is inconsistent to then also say that the people who are on the receiving end of the consequences we predicted are inherently hateful, are inherently uninformed, are inherently ignorant, are inherently, right? That's inconsistent with the structural environment that we ourselves critique. Yeah. So that's why I also feel like we can come to it with some grace, especially recognizing, or at least, maybe it's hard sometimes, at least trying to be optimistically believe that most people don't love it. To be cruel, most people don't love it. They really don't. That is not how they see themselves. And so when you see them that way, and talk to them and about them that way, they shut down. And with that, they shut down the chance of change. And I want people to change.
Yeah, well, and, so the ABC, it's affirm, bridge, convince.
Buy the books, folks. Try it at home with your uncle. It's always an uncle.
Well, no, I think,
I get a lot of,
answer.
I mention Aunt, but 80% of people come up to me, it's an uncle.
Well,
at Thanksgiving.
So it's Uncle Ned.
I've learned people need to call their uncles more, not just see them at Thanksgiving.
Well, and I sort of have two questions now. So one of the question that I wanted to ask is sort of so the ABC, I like it. I can see how that would be more effective than what I tried, which was yelling at my relatives. There were like meltdowns at the dinner table. I was literally like bribed by my cousins to not continue starting arguments with my relatives.
How much did you make? Because that's a good strategy if you...
I was bribed with the treats, with like different items of meal, of beverage.
Items of meal.
And items of meal.
I'm gonna make a t-shirt of items of meal. I'm gonna give it to you. I'll send it to you.
And it's almost like, and I get this, like there are obviously times I don't want it. There are moments where, I'm talking to, especially when it is someone that I don't feel as hostile towards. When I'm talking to a relative I really love or a friend I hold very dear and they say something offensive, I obviously want to nudge them and say, like, this is not an okay thing to say and that's why. But I'm also not gonna go full ham the way that you would go with, your Uncle Ned. Like, you're not gonna be like, that was awful. I'm never gonna, you offer them a little bit of compassion because you offer them this benefit of the doubt, this, like not assuming bad faith, assuming good faith. And I'm wondering, can we shift towards a model in our activism where we use ABC? Because it's the disappointing aspect here is I do feel like when we talk about the consequences and the way the media has fueled and the way lawmakers have fueled it, on some level it also works. We are very susceptible to the fear-mongering and the hate-mongering, and we fall for it, and then we click about it, and then we are reading about it and getting further entrenched in it and further angered by it, and then the two truths appear, and there's just no way to get out of there. And I'm sort of wondering, like, how do we make a model where we're actually like, hey, it seems like we share an overlapping concern. However, because, we do this a lot in our writing at Ms. and we're published by the FMF. And obviously a big part of your work when you're an advocacy organization is to say, this is a falsehood, because if you actually cared about the number of women getting abortions, you would offer contraception or comprehensive abortion care so that people actually have full options. If you cared about women's health, you would offer those things. You claim that that's what you're worried about, but then you're putting up legislation. And so we'll highlight sort of that hypocrisy.
Yes.
And so how do we move, though, into an ABC where we're out of that echo chamber? And how do we actually reach across the aisle as activists with that model, when it's so easy then for someone to just be like, well, I'm using hate and it works for me and we don't need to hear you out.
And look, again, as a sort of scholar of movements, amateur scholar of movements, as someone who has studied in and been, adjacent to movements, and sort of a fan of social movements as the driving mechanism of mass structural and radical change in the United States and around the world. Again, I recognize there's a spectrum of strategies, right? It's not to say, like, anyone who says the only way to do anything or win anything is selling you a hill of beans. Like, that's right. It's not true. And in fact, we often need those strategies. So you look at any successful movement, right? Whether it was civil rights or the sort of first wave or second wave feminism, or the LGBT movement, and
lots of tactics.
It had many tactics. It had peace factions that were mad at each other. That you're two on the right. We were mad at the dykes on bikes, and they were mad at the accommodationists, right? And we were the dykes. Bunch of us in the middle. No, but I mean, it was like a thing, and those were intense.
It's true. I mean, right? it goes on.
Yeah,
it still happens. There's a lot of respectability policing, and
right. So first of all, it's to just recognize. It is to just recognize that there is a spectrum, right? That change and movements and strategies take many, many, many forms. Now, I happen to think that there is a bit of a way in which some of the options have been pitted, or possible strategies have been pitted against one another in a way that is not necessarily necessary. So, for instance, like sort of a broad kind of do some broad strokes, but like the idea that to win progressive change on issues or politically, you want to focus on the base of progressives, right? So the people who are already with you, this in the case of Democratic Party politics is, for instance, don't worry about those swing voters, don't worry about the white working class, grow the pie, grow the Democratic base with a focus on voters of color and progressive whites, and that's how you get your victory. I, by the way, happen to lean toward that strategy myself, in part because I think that the Democratic Party has a historic fixation on the sort of desperation for the legitimacy of white voters that's a holdout of white supremacy, in the sense that the only legitimate way to win an election is to win a majority of white voters. So I push that.
You're like, just an aside.
But let's be clear, it's not incompatible with talking to, engaging working class white voters. Now it can be when you're saying, hey, let's run a mushy centrist, candidate who is calls himself a Democrat but is anti-choice and anti-gun policy, gun reform, and who no one on that Democratic base is going to show up for or be excited about. And we barely, maybe even possibly eke out that sort of, middle of the road white working class voter. That to me, right? But we now are seeing how, right, you can have candidates who cross constituencies, who bring issues together, who lead with principle. And so I think it is possible. In other words, they don't have to be pitted against each other necessarily. Sometimes tactics can, in fact, be aligned.
Yeah, definitely.
Sorry, we got moving on wonky there. Also, is it 180? You all can't see, but the sun is hello, sun.
I thought you were gonna say in here, and I was like,
it's 180,000 degrees in here. It's really warm.
I'm sorry.
I keep chugging the water. It's fine. Sorry. Hi again, internet. I just thought we should stop and talk about.
Well, and yeah, so.
Sorry, I totally threw you off.
No, I'm looking at my notes, trying to figure out where to pick up.
I'm very menopausal here or something. I'm just I just got to LA and it's really hot.
Well, okay, so obviously, some of the concepts in this book are, no, because some of the concepts in the book are going to be reverberating and applicable at that large level, and then some of them are, person to person. And like you said, like some of us can engage, and maybe it is that some of these person-to-person exercises in here are suited towards people who have the privilege to say, I feel safe intervening in this conversation and taking on this role of sort of compassionately talking sense into someone, because for me, there is not a, it's a, it's that,
I'll take it.
It's a bless your heart kind of compassion.
Sure.
But yeah, like, and I think that is true too. And that's interesting because I hadn't thought of that too when I was reading the book, like this idea that, obviously this isn't suited for every fight. If someone is, trying to hurt you in that moment, you're probably not going to be like, hey, I also am worried about the economy. And I think that's where we need to, I think.
She's stripping, folks. Oh my God, wait, I can't. Look, I've got sweat. Oh. Never mind. You put the clothes back on. That's right, just trying to get the viewership up with a little mid-Facebook Live strip show. You're making a really important point, which is that it's about both what we choose to do as individuals and where we fall on that sort of spectrum of engagement. Again, I'd rather like non-engagement or compassionate, kind, constructive engagement, and I would like to not have
maybe hate and anger as a last resort.
Look, we can talk about the difference between anger and hate. I think they're different things, but hate and attacking and destruction and sort of right. I literally would rather our side not do that because I happen to have a bias toward the left, and I'd like to see the left generally take the high road and live out our values.
Well, and for those of us who are in the position to be the folks who are, doing this, whether that means that we are the people in the situation with privilege or that we are, me engaging with some anti-gay troll or sexist troll just because, in that particular moment, I feel up for it and the stakes don't seem as high or scary in that moment for me. How do those of us who are leveraging some privilege in these kinds of situations, I feel like this also comes back to some of these conversations that are swirling around the book, how do we practice these sorts of compassionate activism without sort of coddling, see that's also a dismissive term, but without sort of acting as if, these problematic views that people might have that we're trying to talk to them about without making them feel like they're being heard because their viewpoint is accurate or correct. Like without sort of validating their, like basically how would you leverage one of these person-to-person techniques and make sure that we're not at the same time sort of like, oh, it's okay though that you said something really, homophobic
it's not. And it's not. Look, let me give an example.
It's not.
Just an example. First of all, and by the way, what you also just said, I just want to pick up, which was really brilliant, was in addition to some of us having, sort of we all can play different parts, we also can play different parts moment to moment, right? So there are moments where I'm not engaging, right? There are moments where, because of my own safety or sanity or sense of, that's too mean. I'm not like, no, if we have a constructive conversation, right? Don't get me wrong. For the book, I called up my trolls because I was curious to talk to them, but I'm not like making a habit of going out.
You're not getting
to
tea
coffee,
with them.
right? I guess tea. That's what you would get with trolls. Tea with trolls. I might have to do that, like the Jerry Seinfeld
Spilling the
thing,
tea with the trolls
right?
might be worth it.
Trolls getting tea in trucks. I don't.
Oh, okay. Yes.
I'm gonna trademark that. No, but so God, F was I gonna say?
That you're not regularly reaching out, and it's not.
What? Oh no, go ahead. Sorry. Now I'm like totally.
Well, that sometimes you might be up to it, and sometimes you're not. I think might be where you were headed with that, right?
I was, but then you had another. I was gonna say something other. Lordy, time change. Which is about okay. So when you want to do it, how do you do it? Right? Like, what's the sort of okay? Here's the thing. I mean, this is a little like it goes back to kindergarten. It's just like, well, if you had a view that you thought should be challenged, even if you didn't want to be challenged, right? But you can look back and say, oof, remember when I thought that? Remember when I thought it was okay to say that, or think that, or right? I'm sure glad I learned better. I'm sure. Now, how were you engaged? Who engaged you in a way that was the most constructive, that made you want to be open to listening, even if it was uncomfortable and right? So I think that if we can think about that for a second, that helps. Not the whole answer, right?
Yeah.
By the way, you're going to stumble. You're going to whatever. So let me give an example. I was going to give an example. Hannity. By the way, it took me, so, you know, for those who don't know, before I was at CNN, I was at Fox News as a lefty lesbian, which happens.
Sure.
And, and you know, it took me a while to realize that actually the point wasn't for me to argue with Hannity, for the most part, because I wasn't going to change his mind on most anything, and it didn't matter. He was the excuse to talk to his audience, who were really the people who maybe they felt really strongly about this, but they weren't so sure on that. And
they're sort of there to learn.
And they're sort of there to learn. And let's be clear, like in 2010, 2011, there were more Democrats watching Fox News than MSNBC and CNN combined. Okay. So that was, but let me also just say that, I don't know if folks remember, 2012, by the way, still, even when I see Hannity, and we do consider each other friends, but even when I see him, most of the time we just end up arguing about politics, but we do it without destroying and attacking and demeaning and humanizing each other. Doesn't mean I don't think he sometimes does it to others, and I don't like it, and I tell him so. So, I don't know if people remember, 2012, after Obama was reelected, Sean Hannity came out, not in perfect terms, but he came out and said he supported a path to citizenship for immigrants. He said they are hardworking folks, they're part of this country, they deserve to be able to stay. Now, he didn't end up sticking with it. I will say, I would give my left arm for him to still be advocating for that position. Him sticking with that, standing up for that, would do more to advance immigration reform in this country than literally anything I could do. So again, I'm not giving up on anyone, but now let me give the example. So once upon a time, I'm on the radio, I'm on Sean Hannity's radio show. We are arguing, this is pre-Obergefell decision, we're arguing about marriage equality, and he says something to the effect of, this was a few years into us, maybe a year and a half into us knowing each other. He says, I know, he says something to the effect of, but you know, we all have to agree, you know, a mom and a dad are the best environment to raise kids. Now, let's pause. Let's be clear. I could have said, Sean, you hateful, homophobic. Right, I could have. No one would have faulted me. No one would have faulted me. Certainly no one on my side. Probably would have gotten more ratings, right? The clip would have gone viral. Let's be clear. I would have gotten more social reward for it on the left. I could have done that, right? I think I would have felt ideologically, morally, principally, personally, I was attacked. I can, you know, like I would be justified. So I'm not saying that would have been a choice one could make. What I did not. I said, Sean, said something to the effect of, Sean, are you suggesting your family is superior to my family? He said, well, I'm not talking about your, you know, don't take it personal. I said, Sean, of course I take it personal. It's personal. You're talking about my partner, me, my kid, our family. And he sort of fumbled and stumbled again and quickly ended the segment. And then the next day, Sean Hannity comes and finds me in makeup and says he's sorry. Says he didn't know I was gay. And then I literally did a like survey in makeup. I was like, hey, everybody, show of hands, who knows I'm gay? They're all, right? Okay, but whatever. You know, we all have our blind spots. So saying that I was gay didn't mean to offend me. You know, does there a thing, people where he tells me private, you know, about some of his more complicated views and nuanced views, and asks about my family, asks to see pictures, we talk about my family, and you know, our conversation continued to go from there. I say this because, again, here's someone who I tend to think of as, with regard to issues of gay rights, queer rights, trans rights, gender nonconformity, I think of as being hateful, as having said hateful things and supported hateful positions. And I could, And I don't think anyone would fault me for writing him off entirely in that regard, or just writing him off, period. Right? Refusing to engage with him because of things he's said and done. And how will the world change if I do that? Right? But I also recognize not everyone can have those conversations with Sean Hannity. This is why I try to, this is sort of, I recognize that's a space I can be in and move in, and hopefully in constructive and helpful ways. Again, recognizing that's just one example. What's more important are the people who email and say, I never thought about that, or you made a good point about that, or, I don't support gay marriage, or I don't support abortion rights, I haven't thought about that. I heard where you said that, because I'm not attacking them in standing up for what I believe.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so you're saying also that basically you have sort of seen that there is a reverberating impact even from that point of when people feel like they are ready to listen because they're being treated with that compassion, they maybe do ultimately change their mind on an issue because they're one step closer to changing their mind on an issue. I'm sure that Sean Hannity is not like officiating gay weddings anytime soon, but
I've thought, it's a funny note, I've thought of asking, don't think that's hard for you. But can we just stop for a second and recognize how much people have changed just on that issue? Now, that has to do with gayness and its proximity to whiteness, especially in some how we construct it in our society, and it also has to do with this neat thing that gay people can do, queer people in general, where they kind of can be like stealth in a family. Do you know what I mean? Like you can kind of
and exist across communities,
right? And you can be like
this
dormant for like 18 to 35 years, and then suddenly you spring it on people, and like that doesn't work so much necessarily with other issues. You know what I mean? So like it is a right, so it has something to do with that, because we know how much knowing people makes it right.
Yeah.
And it does have to do with a sort of the kind of elite manifestation of, gay identity, especially in the last 20 years, 20, 30 years. But yet, I have like right-wing conservatives who ask me how my wife is. And I'm like, we're not married because I'm against the state institution of marriage and the way that the state ranks certain kinds of families and excludes others. And I would actually rather, but like they come up to me and just right?
And do you feel like that has, changed maybe their ability to prop up people who have more hardline views, or even continue having the hardline views themselves? Like even just your presence. I mean, because that's one of the biggest theories too about the gay rights movement, is sort of this idea that, well, now that I know that, which we see too with sexism, which is super annoying. Like, now that I'm a father of a daughter, I no longer believe that sexual assault is okay, or now I'm worried about something that affects all women because I suddenly remembered that I have a mother. And but do you feel like that compassion really does sort of, that the sea change maybe comes not even from us practicing it, but from the people who are witnessing it then saying, like, in that moment where they are next pressed to have that hardline view that we might find super hateful and offensive, they think to themselves, well, that's true. I don't think that Sally's family is worse than mine. I don't think that Sally is a bad parent or partner.
Again, knowing people, experiencing others is not the whole answer. We know it's not the whole answer, right? Especially given the deep history of hate that manifests itself in our habits, our minds, consciously, unconsciously, in our institutions and systems and policies. It's not the whole answer. And we know that it is a piece of solution. We know that 3/4 of white people say they don't have any non-white friends. We know that more than half of Americans, we know that more than half of Americans say they don't know anyone who's Muslim. Right? And so when then you have incidents of police violence, state violence, police brutality against Black folks, that is, for white folks who do not know Black folks, that is that makes it harder for them to have a deeper understanding and connection to that experience. We know that when, for people who do not know anyone who's Muslim, and then they turn on Fox News or they look online and they see the, can I say bullshit?
Yes.
And it can land because they don't have any other information, any personal knowledge that trumps it. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean that personal knowledge always trumps it, right? But so it is relevant, and the fact that we have, and this is also connected to our policies, the fact that we have deeply segregated schools and yawning economic inequality and class segregation in our communities, it affects who we know and who we relate to. And again, that is a piece. That is a piece of our, because go back to what we did learn from gay rights with ridiculous rapidity was that, we saw the data. The more people knew a gay person, the more supportive they were of gay rights, more and more people got to know gay people, and it moved like incredibly quickly because of that special stealth thing that we gays can do.
It's a superpower.
It is totally a superpower. You know? Straight cloak on.
Pop up when you least expect it. Well, and so, okay. So I guess I've taken a lot of your time. So I'm like, here's
oh my gosh, I can do this all day with you. I'm sorry. Yeah.
My closer, though, is sort of, I'm sure that you had, obviously, yes, this book was about your journey. This journey sort of into the depths of hate so that you could figure out how we can claw ourselves back out. And, obviously it comes at a time where a lot of people, I think, are feeling that the world is incredibly, well, maybe not even, yes, the world, but specifically in the US, my own experiences is just, people are very divided and polarized and angry and hateful. And it's shocking. And, I'm sure there was this intent that you had for the book, this hope that you had for what it would do once it was born, like all parents do. And I'm sort of wondering, where do you hope it goes from here?
Yeah, first of all, we didn't get to it, and I just want to footnote here that anger and hate are two different things.
Oh, yeah.
They are. Right? I actually, as an organizer, I was trained that anger is a good thing. You want to look around at.
And certainly we are justified in our anger, too.
Right. You should be angry. We should look at, right, pay inequity and, the flagrant racial bias in mass incarceration, and we should be angry. That is constructive anger. That is the way things change and the way people decide to make change. So there's a difference between anger and hate, where we demean and dehumanize certain people, especially certain groups of people, because of their identities or ideas. So I want to say that. My hope is, my hope is that we can stop arguing about whether hate is a problem, stop pointing fingers at them and their hate, and do something about our hate so that we can all start to be part of the solution instead of always being part of the problem and pointing fingers about the problem. Address hate at every level, small, big, unconscious, conscious, explicit, individual, institutional. And the takeaway for me, which I hope you can take away as well, and then do with what they will, is that if we all have this, they started it, philosophy of hate. And so someone else did something hateful, so I feel like I'm justified in responding with hate, so then I respond with hate, so then they feel justified in being hateful because I did it, and then. What I'm going to do, I can only control myself, and what I am going to do is I am going to try to not be the excuse for someone else to be their worst self. I don't want to be the excuse for anyone else to be their worst self. What I'm going to try to be is the inspiration for others to be their best selves. Through my work, through my learning, through my improving, through my speaking out, through my actions, that's what I hope, that's what I took away from this process. It's what I hope to share with others.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. And if you do want to pick up the book, it looks like this. Oh, look, the glare went away slightly. So The Opposite of Hate by Sally Kohn. And yeah, there's a link to our review too in the video. And thank you so much. It was great talking to you.
Thank you, Internet.
Bye, guys.
Do you think the Russians will watch it?